our leadership, which I think is going to manifest this October. That I think we will have I don't think the election will look anything like people think, but the angel said at one point is that there would be a leader who dies in a night, that is like he dies on the way to the hospital, and that then creates a massive uprising. My name is Ann Tucker, and thank you so much for inviting me onto your channel. I am a trance channel. I channel from the angelic realm, and I do that by raising my awareness. I go into a deep meditative state or trance, and from there, I raise my awareness up as high as I can go. I go a little higher, I connect, and then messages and information comes through, and I share it on my own channel on YouTube. And I'm actively working in order to try to help people move through this shift in consciousness as easily as possible. So I was born with, and everybody has at least one spiritual gift, at least one. And many people have multiple spiritual gifts. And my particular cocktail of gifts includes trance channeling. So there's lots of different ways to be a channel. You can channel clairvoyantly, which means you see images with your mind. You can be clairaudient, where you hear with your ears. You can be clairsentient, where you feel it in your body, like it feels like a warmth or a tingling, or claircognizant, where you have like a deep knowing of things. And then it had come through in other channelings and readings I'd gotten from others that I was meant to do it. And then I was working as a healer. I was actively working with clients, and I was used to my healing guides coming in. They would always come in through my back. I could feel them, and they would come in and they would come through my heart and through my hands, and we would work on other people. And but one day I sat down to meditate, and all of a sudden I had this incredible pressure come over me. Literally, I closed my eyes to meditate, and then boom, it came down over me like a helmet, like over my head and over my shoulders. And it was tight, like squeezing, like being at the bottom of an ocean. So it was this super, super tight pressure. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand. I felt like somebody was sitting on me. The pressure was so intense on my chest and on my third eye that it felt like I was actually hard to breathe. Like I had to push against this pressure in order to breathe. And it didn't let up, and I kept wondering, like, if one of my guides is trying to come in, like it felt like they were sitting on me, why don't they just come in through the back like they always would? Why don't they just come in and heal like I always would? But it just stayed. It didn't let up, and that went on for 6 months. Every single time the minute I closed my eyes to meditate, boom, this pressure was there. And finally, after 6 months of not being, and imagine I was trying and trying and trying to figure it out. After 6 months, it finally occurred to me they were not trying to come in, they were trying to lift me up. So I opened my crown. As soon as I thought of that, my crown opened and zoop, I was up. And I was with the angels. And I could see, because I was clairvoyant, I could see I was in a space where I had like a semicircle of angels around me. And I was super excited, amazingly excited, because it was like, oh my gosh, it worked, I'm here. What's going to happen now? And I was waiting for them to say something or to do something. And they all just sat there perfectly still, smiling at me, this lovely smile, and nobody said a word. And I'm trying to get them to talk. I'm asking questions, nothing. They just sat there smiling and waiting for me, and just waiting and waiting and they never gave me the tiniest clue what to do next. And I said, okay, well, why don't, if you can't speak, maybe you could write a message. Like, what about on a whiteboard or a tablet? Or, what am I supposed to do next? No idea. And that went on for another 6 months, where every time I meditated, I'd go up and we would sit there and smile at each other until I was done. And yes, it was driving me crazy. And then finally, it dawned on me that I was meant to go up, but I was meant to stay partly here and to stay partly conscious, that I was meant to go up and to kind of see them clairvoyantly, but to stay enough in my body. So I said, okay, I'm going to try it this way. So I sat down and I just took a pen and paper, and I just said, okay, just if this is going to work, send me a word. And they did. And it almost like it came down through a pipe, and one word at a time. And I just wrote one word, one word, one word. And I didn't think it was making any sense until I got to the end. And then it made a, I read it and it blew my mind away. It was absolutely gorgeous. And over time, they said, okay, now rather than writing it, try speaking it, just speak and see what happens. And that's how it developed. And so as time went on, I learned to get more and more and more out of the way and to let them come through and speak through me. But it was not, it was not a thing where I just learned how to do it immediately. It for me, it was trial and error and a lot of patience. I've had a lot of forecasts about humanity's future. That is a lot. As a matter of fact, when I first started trance channeling, that was one of the hardest things. Is the some of the first messages that came through were extremely difficult messages about some of the earth changes that are coming. So like before we get to the shift in consciousness, we have to go through a pretty significant unraveling. And those were some of the first messages I got. And what the angels said as they came through very clearly, they said, you must share this. And the last thing I wanted to do was share it. Like I did not want to be that person that's, the sign that says, we the end is near, like it sounded terrible to me. And but eventually I realized in terms of the messages that were coming, I realized that deep down we all knew this before we got here. And that a lot of people felt it at some level. And in some ways, that not knowing, that vague, unsure uncertainty that I was seeing from a lot of people who were talking about, I just have this feeling. And that was almost worse than just knowing. And I realized that I'm not telling people anything new. I'm just helping to bring to the surface what deep down they already know. And much, much more important is that in many cases, it will help a lot of people. So I finally decided to go ahead and share it. But yeah, so some of the first messages that came through were about there's going to be a large earth rift, a rift in the earth. And the angels called it a earth rift. It'll happen most likely somewhere in the Indian Ocean, I believe. They said Indian line near ocean, sort of between India and Indonesia, somewhere there. And it is a massive earth event. And they said this is all part of the earth's healing. The earth herself is going through her own shift in consciousness. So in the same way that we heal, that we have to lift our own traumas to the surface and release them, so does she. So she's trying to move to a higher state of consciousness. And what she has inside of her, she has anger, she has fear. And so she needs to purge that. And so what that looks like is, volcanic eruption. It looks like that kind of stuff. So she is going through that process, and it's hard for them to put a specific date or time. Everybody always asks when. I think the Earth rift happens sooner versus later. I think it could be sometime in conjunction with some of the other big events that are coming up. I understand they will give me sort of sequences of things. So some of the first things that happen are this big earthquake, which they said is a big enough explosion that we will hear it all the way around the world. That it will be a really so Tonga exploded like last year, I think it was, and I thought maybe that was it, but that you could only hear halfway around the world. This was literally everyone on the planet will hear it. It'll be that big of a deal. And something very important that I would love to share is that they have said that there will be a gas cloud that comes out of this earth rift. There will be gas that comes. And they said that it will move up and towards Syria, Middle East, Turkey, in that direction. It'll move from that kind of India Ocean area up and that way. And they said that if somebody is living in a region where this gas cloud comes, they said it'll kind of move up to the jet stream and it'll settle, where the air is heavy, it'll settle. If it comes, people need to stay indoors and not go outside. If they stay indoors and don't breathe, don't go outside, they will be okay. But so often people are like, I got to go check on a relative. I got to go outside. And they say, don't do that. You got to, if this comes to an area where someone lives, all they got to do is stay indoors. Keep the doors closed, keep the windows closed, try their best not to breathe the outside air. And that they mentioned specifically that that was an important message to share. And I understand it'll pass. The air will pass, the gas will pass, just they will pass gas. So within a few days, a breeze the breeze will blow it, and then they will be okay again. So it's just a thing to be very aware that if this earth rift comes, for anyone on the planet to be aware that there is an associated toxic gas, which is really not good. And to just be aware of where it is, and to, if it comes near you, to be super conscious about, don't go outside and wait till it passes. So, but that was the first thing they talked about. They talked a lot about, and they said some of the kickoff to this whole thing, it happens in the United States around the economy, that, and if some of the first messages were about economic turmoil in the United States. But they talked about that economic turmoil, it leads to chaos around our leadership, which I think is going to manifest this October. That I think we will have I don't think the election will look anything like people think it will look. I think it will be chaotic. And they said it would lead to the separation of the states, not through civil war, but through kind of just general secession, that the states will start to secede from the United States. So major, major changes to our country, to this country, to the one I live in. And they said that then there's relationships there that then play out in the rest of the world. So for example, they said that China would then assert its dominance over Taiwan. And they said that Japan would try to rally the rest of the world against China. And in the long run, they said China, in the long run, it falls apart. They said in the long run that China becomes separated just like the United States does. They said that it loses its central leadership. And they said there'll be difficulties during that period, that because there's no longer the central distribution of things. So it'll be hard for people for a little while in China in terms of just distributing goods and getting things out, because there's no longer a central, it's like the central focus falls apart. And so that is something. So in general, I mean, there's so much here. There's, because of the chaos and the climate, but some of the beautiful thing about this is that so we do go through a period of, like, climate disasters. We go through economic shifts, major economic shifts. We go through political shifts around the world. We go through an expansion of war. There's expanded war, and then boom, there is this flash of light that comes, which is the good news. It is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And the flash of light, they said, hurts no one. The flash of light is a solar energy that comes to the planet that is designed to raise our frequency, everyone on the planet. So no one is excluded. The only way that someone can avoid the flash of light is by choice. Or if they're holding very, very tightly to the way things were. If they want to, if they're really in fear and they're really scared of change and they're trying desperately to keep things the way they were, they are turning their back on the light. But also one has to, that's part of the reason it's so important to communicate about it, to tell people when this comes, this is going to be beautiful. This is going to take us to a higher state of consciousness. So people lean in and they feel open and they are trusting. So what this eventually leads us to is a state where having a higher state of consciousness, it opens us up to a sixth sense. So we still have our five senses. We still have smell, touch, taste, all of that, but we develop this higher sixth sense, which gives us like telepathic, almost like if you would consider yourself an empath, it's like empath on steroids, and everybody becomes an empath, where we all feel each other's feelings, where all of a sudden, when we talk to one another, it's not just words. It becomes, I feel your feelings as if I was you. I know your internal emotional state. I understand deeply what your experience is. And when you have that depth of connection with someone, you can't help but love them. It creates this sense of unity between people. And imagine what the world will be like if we're in a situation where we feel each other's feelings to that degree, that how can one person claim that they have more right to natural resources than anyone else if you feel that other person's pain and suffering? It creates a world of peace. Eventually, I don't know how long it takes, but we get to a state of peace, and we get to a state of unity, and that's what it's oneness, it's unity consciousness between everyone, and that is the goal. But we have to unwind all of these systems that are not in alignment with where we're going. So, I mean, it sounds scary in the beginning, but where we're headed is freedom. We're headed to a place where what your life looks like is so you're moving from a karmic experience where we are right now living in a world of such density that it is designed to show us, to confront us with our inner wounds, where we're constantly bumping up against things that trigger us and upset us and hurt us, because that's what we are on the inside. Those are the ways in which we've judged ourselves in the past. So we see it in our outer world in an attempt to try to see it. It's hard to look inside. We look outside and we see all these wounds, and that's our karmic experience. We're moving from that world, which is a very difficult school, right? It's a very hard way to learn. We're moving from that into a dharmic experience, which is totally different. In a dharmic world, it's like you're riding on the crest of a wave and reality is coming up to meet you, and you're creating your reality in every moment, and time expands as you need it to. So, say for example, and it doesn't mean we're perfect, because we're still not perfect. When we get to this new reality, we still have wounding. But rather than what happens now, which is that we're kind of in our own world and we're kind of blind to how we're creating a reality where we're having to live that wounding all the time, which is the karmic experience. Instead, we are living in a situation where we're riding on the crest of the wave. We see the wounding rise up and we're able to work with it right there in the moment. We're able to heal it right there in the moment. So it's a really different world. We don't have to suffer. And it becomes something where the goal in this new reality is to understand ourselves as creators, to really understand the challenge of working in this new reality. And it also becomes, we become stewards of the earth. So it's a very, very different, it's so much happier, right? So much more joyful. And yeah, so that is where we're headed. And so there's trauma on the way for sure. But they've said, and this is super key, that as we are going through some of these more difficult events, all you got to do is raise your own vibration, shut out what's going on around outside, turn inward and raise your vibration. Focus on love, focus on gratitude. And it's easy to conjure up, think of anything that makes you feel grateful, and just go inside and feel those feelings. And it'll help you turn upward and connect. And that is your passage. If you are in a high vibration, the chaos will not hurt you. So yeah, so that is the key. There will be, in this process, there will be, and that's a difficult part of this, there will be loss of life. But the angels have said that there are many beings who came to the planet knowing that that was going to be the case. And that through the process of that, when they leave, it says that when those people who have chosen to come, who have chosen to leave as part of this experience, that they said they won't feel, they won't have any physical trauma, that they will be taken from their bodies before any pain is felt. So, and they, as part of that experience, their frequency will go up. So everybody wins is the moral of the story. The only thing that we have to literally look out for is that there's a lot of people on the planet who are not yet on a spiritual journey, on a spiritual path, and they will find a lot of fear in these experiences, and they may find the flash of light very scary and turn away from it. And so eventually they will be looking to people like you for help. They'll be looking for, they'll say, why are you so happy? How come you're shining so brightly? How do I get some of that? And that's why we're here. That's what I mean about the before team and the after team. That is why we're here, is to help the people that need help. This is meant to be for everyone, for all of us. There's no one that's meant to be excluded. Anybody who wants to come is invited. So that then there's also, coupled with that, the fact that the angels do not experience time. They live outside of time. Time is a human construct and they don't have it. So very, very rarely do they give me dates or times, but they have given me sequences. So I understand, I think some of the first stuff to happen, and some of the stuff they talked about has already happened. They've been giving me messages on these topics since 2020, and many of the things have already occurred, such as the supply chain shortages. They talked about truck drivers abandoning their routes. That's all happened. They talked about the bank crisis that's already begun. They talked about that the U.S. would lose its political hegemony, the dollar would become weaker, that they would be issues with processing payments. All of these things have all come to pass. And the processing payments thing, I think, and the banking thing, I think there's still a whole lot more to come on those issues. But they talked about all these issues long before they happened. But but I think going forward, if I had to give my best guess, I think this is a really, I think we are in it now. I think we are in the middle of some of the most important issues coming to pass, such as, and they said there would also be significant amount of flooding. That's another thing to be aware of, which has already been happening. But I think after the earth rift, I think there is more flooding. So that's something to be aware of for sure. To be very aware of that. But I believe that we have the economic uncertainty strikes in the US first. I think it's tied to the election, and they talked about the upcoming election. Like I said, I don't think it's going to happen the way it's supposed to. I believe that there may be at least the belief that there may be people convinced that there's been, so we may have the death of a leader is possible. And I don't know if the recent assassination attempt on Trump was what they were talking about. Like it could be the timeline shift and it was almost a death of a president, but it still could come that there's the death of a leader. They just said the death of a leader that would lead to riots and that would be the spark that really becomes the separation of the country. So, and there's certainly stuff around, like, could it be related to, we had that eclipse across the United States with a big X right over Texas and the border crisis. So there's so many things that could be coming from this, so many problems so anyways, but in terms of the timing of it, I think that the economic crisis and the election are right wound up with one another. So I think we're winding into that now. And then as we get past that, I think we step into a broader war in 2025, going through 2025 is my guess. The flash of light, I have thought that it would be in the second half of 2026, but I recently did an interview with Pam Gregory, who is a fabulous astrologer, and she thought it would be within the next 12 months, which was great news. If that's the case, I am thrilled. So like I said, the angels don't give me timing, but I know we are in it. Like it's not long, I don't think. I think, and there are people out there who are channeling similar information and they predict further out. They might say 10 years from now, but within our lifetimes, definitely within our lifetimes. And from my money is on sooner than that. My money is on in the next, 2 years, up through like towards the end of 2026. So, and I sure hope that's the case because I know that we have to get through some hardship, but I'd like to pull the Band-Aid off fast. You know what I mean? Let's get through it. Let's get to the good stuff. And yeah, so it will be pretty amazing when we get there. And I think the hardships are worth it. That everything the angels have said, everything that we lose is stuff we don't need. That in the way that we will be going forward, we won't miss any of it. So yeah, so the idea is to, as much as we can, to trust, release, allow, and try to be in flow, to stay in love out of fear. It's really, yeah. And I know it's not easy because we've been taught so much about how we're meant to live a life. There's so many things we're meant to do that in terms of, we talk about economic crises, and there's a lot of people that are thinking, what about my savings? What about my retirement? What about, how am I going to make a way in the world? And like I said, the angel said, whatever we lose, it's because we don't need it. That however things change in the future, it will be a better situation. Things will be better for us. But it's going to be getting through in the short term. They have suggested that in terms of practical steps, they constantly advise people to have a way to clean their water. They ask people to say, you want a way, and you can get really inexpensive methods to purify your water. You could get, there's thing called a life straw. You want something that will eliminate viruses is ideal, because the problem when you have a lot of flooding is that it can contaminate your water systems, so you can end up with bad water. So, and there's increasing amounts of flooding already around the world since they first told us this in 2020, and it just seems to get worse and worse and worse. But other thing is having a little bit of cash on hand, so that if there is a closure of the banks, that you have It may be a situation, I don't know, but I mean, one example we can look to is think about like in Lebanon, they had a banking crisis, and it isn't that people could get no money out of the bank, it's that they it's like they rationed it. They didn't want a bank run, so they said, okay, you can take out, whatever it was, 300 bucks a month, but which may be enough to cover your basic expenses in Lebanon. But what if somebody has, maybe you break a window? What if you need a car repair? Like, what if something happens and you need a little extra money? So if you can do that, if you have a little savings, if you can pull a little bit out to have, in the event that the banks are closed, it's not a bad idea. The other thing they talked about is having not a, they don't want us to get into prepper mode because they said that's a really negative energy. They don't want us to be in fear, but they do want us to just take some basic precautions like you would for any, it's like Red Cross. What would you do to have just basic disaster preparation? Having a slight backstock. I just call it like a big bag of rice and a big bag of beans. They're inexpensive, they last forever. That way, if it is 10 years from now, they're still good. And so having something like that on hand, it gives you peace of mind, and it can certainly supplement things. They said that it won't be that there's nothing available. It's like there won't be everything available. So you just want to have a few extra things on hand. I think one of the nicest and most important things they've said in terms of how do we prepare is to think locally, not globally. They said shipping will be a catastrophic industry. And so shipping is going to be very, very difficult. So they said, try to develop local networks, try to find people who live near you that offer what it is that you need. So find out who your neighbors are and what skills they have, and what skills can you develop. And it's not a thing where everybody can grow their own food, but maybe you know someone who has a garden, and maybe you can volunteer to help them weed their garden, and say, hey, I'll help you if you will share some of your produce with me. There's all kinds of things you can do to start developing relationships now, so that when something like this happens, that you have a network in place. I don't think the election will look the way that we think it does. I don't think that we will have, I don't know if we will have an election, to be honest. Like, I think what may happen, I think that it may be a thing that if the net result of the election is a destruction of the country. And that is what, and I don't know if it happens right after the election or right before the election. What the angel said at one point is that there would be a leader who dies in a night, that is like he dies on the way to the hospital, and that then creates a massive uprising. And so it could be, I mean, like one scenario would be if Trump wins and then he dies, and then what people would do. Would there be a huge upset, a huge uprising? I did think for a while that there would be a woman that steps forward, which is interesting now that Kamala Harris has stepped forward. But I at the same time that I knew that there was going to be a woman stepping forward, I also saw that she wouldn't be strong enough to pull the country. So so we will see. I don't think we're going. I think that we think of the election. I don't think it's going to, we may have a, maybe we have an election, maybe, and then even if we have one, I don't think it'll stick. I think that it is the beginning of the shift, the change in our country, a massive change. Which is, when I first got these messages, I would have thought that is crazy. I thought, I would have thought never in a million years, but now it's great. Like 4 years later, I think I first started channeling that message in 2020, and here we are in 2024, and it's not so far-fetched anymore. There's so much polarity, there's so much division, and already many of the states are taking initiatives that are in violation of the federal government, which is wild. You know what I mean? It's wild to see. So yeah, at what point, what felt like I felt like a crazy person saying that, now people are like, oh yeah, you hear there's more mentions of civil war in the media than I mean, it's mind blowing. Absolutely. Like to the point where like mainstream media is talking about it. And so, yeah, so I would have thought I was crazy back when I first got that message, but now, yeah, I don't. Now I think it's like, I think it's inevitable. And I think it's about trying to get us back to our roots. Like, why did we form as a country in the first place? It's supposed to be about equality and liberty, right? And justice for all. And it's not, it's not that at all. And we have to get back to the reasons why we became a country. Oh, do I think Donald Trump will win? I think I mean, like right now, he has been the front runner. Um, and I don't know, like I felt like in the messages that I got, like they didn't specifically say if one person would win or not. The angels have not said that, but they did say that there would be the death of a leader. And so, yeah. So I mean, it's like I hope that doesn't happen, but if it is him, it certainly would create an uprising. But if it also, it could be, I mean, like I hate to think, what if it was Kennedy, and that would be just a tragic family burden. And that would also create an uprising. I mean, any of them, really. I mean, any leader dies and it's so polarized, it's going to be crazy. But the way they described it, they said they're disenfranchised followers would feel like their voice had been taken from them. And so I think about disenfranchised. So whose followers are disenfranchised? Well, Trump's followers felt disenfranchised when they had that whole campaign about the vote was stolen. They felt disenfranchised, like they didn't get their vote. And then, but so would maybe Kennedy's feel like they were disenfranchised. If he doesn't make it onto the ballot, if he's not included in the election, well, they're disenfranchised. So at first I was like, oh, it's got to be Trump. I'm like, no, wait a minute. It could be, I have no idea. And I don't even want to put that on anybody. I don't even want to think about that. I just, I think it's the most important thing is to think about the net result, which is that the US falls apart. But it is so necessary. I think that we have a system that is really not healthy, really, really not healthy, and it's got to come undone. And but the initial driver for the undoing is economic. That is what I think. That's why they led with all this stuff about the banking crisis and debt. They kept talking about debt and people not able to pay their debts. And I think it was corporate, I think it was government debt that they're not able to pay their debts. And then they talked about looking for relief from debt and giving away power in order to get it. um, so yeah, so it's going to be interesting times, very interesting times. I don't think that that would apply to just any president. I think it would be in the timeline in which I'm sure they were speaking of one president. Like I said, they were specific when they talked about that it was a president whose followers felt disenfranchised, and then they would then feel like their voice had been taken from them. So this was a leader who spoke their voice, and that they would then feel disenfranchised. Or they would feel like after this person died, that would spur riots. So but I don't think, like, for example, if it was meant to be Trump and if Trump escaped it because he had that assassination attempt and he did move his head and didn't get shot, if that was it and the timeline changed, then I don't think it would change the falling of the US, but there might be a different driver to the falling of the US. I think that timelines can change, but like I talked about at the beginning, that there are these really important, I would call them a point of fate in very important conjunctions in our lives where things are meant to happen one way or another, and we can change all the factors leading up to it. But if that one thing is meant to happen, it's going to happen. And I think that the falling of the US, it's too critical to the shift in consciousness that what the angels have said is we must have the unwinding of the power structures that keep people in place. That if everything stays the way that it is, people will not be motivated to change. There's too much fear of change. And so we have to remove the structures that are holding people in place. And so the way that they've talked about it, one is that it leads to, the death of a leader, which leads to rioting, which then unfolds in terms of the separating of a country. But if for whatever reason, if that did get us, if Trump escaped that, if that was meant to be him, because that is kind of an interesting coincidence. If that was the case, and if the timeline shifted, which can happen, then it will happen in some other way. And that I feel strongly in that. But I also think maybe it wasn't. Maybe that was just another example of the fact that this is a really polarized, crazy time. So we'll just have to see. But I think the most important thing is for people to kind of buckle down, recognize that we're going to be going through a period of really important change. They said it's an energy of exhaustion. And the way the angels talk about these energies that are part of this unwinding is It's an energy that happens, it's not just in one place. Specifically, like is with the messages that we've gotten, many of them have come true, but there's always the potential for a shift in the timeline. But there are these important events that I think will happen no matter what. And I think what I was trying to say earlier is that the angels talk about these energies that they don't happen. For example, there's the energies that happen that can happen like a wave of energy that hits the whole planet, and it will pop up in lots of different places. So for example, with the energy of exhaustion is one of the things that they have mentioned, that we have to exhaust the current power structures. We have to bring them down to the ground. So that energy of exhaustion will show up in multiple places. So you will see in Maui, the fires burn and they burn everything to the ground. You'll see in these war-torn areas that city blocks are leveled to the ground. It's not a thing where they're brought down to a certain level and then you rebuild. It's they're burnt to exhaustion. And this is a really important thing as we're heading through this shift. They said the power structures have to be brought to exhaustion, because if they are not, they will simply rebuild and we'll be right back where we are right now. So these major events have to happen. It has to be a situation where the US is brought to a complete restructuring of itself. Otherwise, we will be held in the same context, in the same belief systems, in the same limitations that we have right now, and it will be really, really hard for people to break out. So it's the same thing like when they talked about truck drivers abandoning their routes. It didn't happen in one place. It happened in the US, it happened in Canada, it happened in Australia, it happened in the UK. It was like little bits here and here and here and here. It comes up because it's an energy and it pops up, and it happens in many places. But yeah, but the key thing I think is this idea that we even if certain things happen not exactly as we planned or as they said, the core thread of everything they've said is bringing us to a known destination, which is a really good place, a really good thing. Yeah, I would say if I was to just share a message about what people could do themselves to help them prepare for what's going on, to be ready for what's going on, is I would say to work on your own self, to work, to go internal, that we often look outside of ourselves to solve issues, but this is not that kind of problem. It's an energy. And the main thing the angels have said again and again and again is bring your focus back to yourself, raise your vibration. And that is the best thing you can do to help you navigate this shift with ease. They said that there's no reason why you have to suffer. You don't have to suffer. That and moving through this process, yes, there will be this incredible flash of light that will raise all of us. He said it's the moment we will look back on and say that is the moment that everything changed, and that's coming. But now, to get ready for it, what we need to do is turn inward, work on ourselves, raise our frequency, raise our vibration,